Hey, this is Kathy Valentine, and you're listening to Tobin Tonight.
So I'm here with Kathy Valentine. Kathy, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you took our call, especially during this time of COVID. I guess the first real question, because I do want to get into about your book a bit later, but the dying question for me is coming out with a book during COVID. Like, was that kind of your decision? Did someone kind of be like, have your arm and go like, come on, write this book. You got to put it out now.
No, up until February, we assumed that everything was going to be fine. I mean, the book release, when you have a publisher, they have a schedule that they stick with. They know what books are going to come out when. They have a cycle. So there wasn't an option of putting it off, because if they put mine off, they would have had to put someone else's off. And so, but up until like probably mid-February, we thought, we would have a normal release and I would do a book tour. And I started having doubts around March. I remember writing saying, do you think my book tour is going to happen? And They were like, well, sure, why not? Why not? And I'm like, I don't know. And when South by Southwest here in Austin canceled, I think that got a lot of people's attention, because that's such a huge deal for the city where I live. And when they canceled, I think looking back, I think they were they really showed a lot of leadership in canceling the festival. We had to cancel my book tour, but keep the book release. And it took a little while to get some bearings, but I hired a publicist, and UT Press, that's the University of Texas Press, who published my book. They had an in-house publicist. It was surprising how much we could do virtually. And it's continued on. I mean, I'm just now launching all the things in Canada, so it's still ongoing, and it's been as best as it can be.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are getting the virtual side of things now, of getting them down, or like down put. Like, I know it's always been around with like YouTube, Facebook, social media to kind of like advertise with stuff, but it seems like now with, say, Instagram Live, Facebook Live, more people are kind of taking the advantage of that, like things that you probably maybe second guessed in the past, like, geez, like we can do it this way, and it kind of works. Like, everything of course has its pros and cons. In a pandemic where just say you can't actually meet people face to face, shake their hands, sign a book, the way like the next best thing is saying, like, if you buy my book here, I will do a virtual meeting with you, or I will do this for you. And you're like, well, that's great. Like, I'm in the comfort of my own home. Like, and it's another way to, get fans involved and just show like, okay, I still care. It's not like I said, no, I'm not doing any of it. So I do think it's kind of interesting. The virtual world sometimes is beneficial in a pandemic or a crisis.
I think it's here to stay, not necessarily the pandemic, but the whole virtual stuff. I think a lot of people have adjusted to not going into an office every day. And I think that, a lot of meetings that, it's and a lot of the performances that so many musicians are, live from their living room, or, I think people enjoy that aspect. I don't think it'll take the place of concerts and live shows, no. But I think it's going to stay.
I'm guessing by the time this will go up, you will be after celebrating a birthday. What is your plans with the pandemic in a birthday? Like, is it going to be like a virtual birthday? Are you going to have like a few of your friends over and be like, hey, like you were my close friends. We're going to have a good time here.
A lot of it depends on how, if things start getting contained a little more. If it was today, I would not do anything, which is a shame, because I traditionally celebrate birthdays. That's something I enjoy. I use it as an excuse to get all my friends together, some people from different parts of my life that get to meet or hang out. So I usually do celebrate. I think this year, I don't think I will be, unless it's a little bit more contained. And then I could maybe doing, something else. Depends how cold it is. I've got a great patio, but I don't know if it's too cold to go out there. So I'll just wait and see.
You were born in Austin, Texas. You were raised by, a single mother. What was life like growing up in Texas at this time, and especially like only child, single mom? Like, can you tell me a little bit of the struggles, basically what your childhood was like at this time?
Well, I'm 60. I'm above 60 actually, and which means that I got to be a teenager in the 70s, which I think is a pretty good trade-off for being older now because being a teenager in the 70s was really pretty cool. It was, I mean, great music. Texas was a great place, Austin in particular, the rest of the state, but Austin was great. We had a great music scene here. The University of Texas is based here. It's the state capital. So it was always been a thriving city. My mom was a single mom, working full time, raising me, going to school full time. So she had her hands full. Plus, she was pretty young. Her and my dad divorced when I was about 3, and he wasn't a part of my life, and it was a source of a lot of sadness and pain for me that I think kind of sat inside me and probably still is to some degree. I didn't really feel like he cared about me. I found out much, 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 much later that he did care, but he just wasn't very good at showing it, I guess, or dealing with his own stuff or whatever. But my mom was very much a free spirit. She didn't parent me at all. There were boundaries in my adolescence. There was no rules or consequences. She very much, I mean, someone might call it feral. Someone else might call it free range. It just depends how you look at it. But basically, I felt like it was my job to take care of myself, and I wasn't that equipped to do that. So I went down a lot of not so great paths. I ended up drinking too soon and getting used to that as a way of coping. I ended up doing drugs way too soon and got used to that. And music pretty much saved me. Music gave me some structure. It gave me a dream. Besides all the usual things that music does for people, which, you know, kind of, I mean, music connects us. It makes us feel our feelings. It takes us back to places that we remember fondly. And it can help us not feel our feelings if we feel out of place and stuff. Music is just, I think for everybody, it plays a central role in everyone's life. So I was no exception to that. But when I became a musician, that really changed my life. And I loved writing about that in my memoir. It's very much a coming of age story about a young, very lost, very messed up girl who kind of finds herself through music and then goes on to lose herself. And when I say herself, I'm talking about me.
Yeah. I like how you kind of gave us a kind of a full story there because there's so much to unpack in that. But I kind of want to go off the aspect of, you know, when you're saying about, I guess, getting into drugs and alcohol and like, you know, in the 70s. I mean, like to me, and I mean this with no like offense or anything, but I'm just like, geez, when I'm watching documentaries on the 70s, if you were about to tell me you've never took a sip of beer or never took a drug, I'd be like, I would just look at you and be like, come on, it was the 70s. You kidding me?
It was a very different time. Yeah.
But I want to get into that aspect too, because where you're mentioning about, you know, having a single mom and you're mentioning about your father not always being there and all the emotions that go with that. Like, how did music kind of play this part in you getting interested in it? Because I know for someone like myself, I've never really picked up a guitar, but like I always kind of wanted to try that or be interested in music. But sometimes you look at a famous singer that, you know, creates a path for you. Sometimes it's a song that you're like, geez, I could write a song like that if I really tried. So what kind of got you down that road of music?
I think I was a little musical, but I'd always been a rock and roll fan from the time I was probably 10. I write about, you know, loving like top 40 bubblegum music and then hearing Cream, hearing Sunshine of Your Love, and how it kind of gave me a whole different context for what music and how it affected me. And from that point on, I always loved so many different kinds of music. But I ended up going to a school it was basically a commune. It was a commune in the woods, and
Okay.
it was a free school, not accredited, but you could learn whatever you wanted to learn. And I went and had the option to pick up guitar. And when I did, I felt like a connection. I felt like I knew that I was always going to play the instrument. But the thing that's interesting was that even though I loved rock and roll and loved all these bands, it didn't really occur to me then, like, oh, I'm playing guitar. so every band I like has a guitar player. Maybe I should join a band. What did that for me was going to England. My mom is English. She was an expat, and we went to see her mother, my grandmother, for Christmas in 1973. And I saw, for the first time in my life, I saw a woman, a female rock star, and it was Suzi Quatro. I'd never seen that. All the bands I loved were guys, and I'd never seen, and not only was she, I mean, she was just one of the band. She was playing bass, and she was the front person, and she had the same clothes and the same hair and the same attitude, and I had just never seen that. And that changed everything. I don't know how many people's lives get changed at their grandparents' house,
Yeah.
but for me, I came back from England very driven and with a purpose, and I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be in a band, and I want to find girls. I want to do it with people like me. That's what I wanted. For some reason, I didn't want to go join a bunch of guys. I wanted to find friends like people like me and do it with them.
Yeah, no, I like that. Like, and I like how you brought in there about, how many times did your life change at your grandparents' house? I guess it depends on the story, right? Like, you don't want to come in and be
Yes,
like, listen, we went to visit your grandparents and we got bad news. I mean, at least this was good news. It was
yeah,
inspirational. But I do like that you brought in, of course, creating almost like this all-female band. And so, like, again, seeing an inspiration like Susie, even when you compare it to the kids today, when they grow up, like someone might look at an Ed Sheeran and say like, geez, like he was singing on the streets and now he's singing world tours. Kids that are involved that are like white kids that are like, we're like, oh, I can never be a rapper, and looking at
yes,
Eminem or something. And you're like, well, geez, if he's doing it, like we have, I think someone from Detroit named NF, and that's who he kind of looked up to. And it's just weird to me in a way, because as I get older, I'm like, I grew up with Eminem and I was like, geez, there's going to be no one else. And then today's kids that are like 16 are like, what are you talking about? Eminem's old school. Like NF is the new best thing. And I'm like, wow, like, okay. It's always someone has to start a trend somewhere. And I look at it as if to say there's got to be bands, I'm saying, even in the 90s or even during the 80s, when you were starting the all-female group with the GoGos and when you started getting the top of the charts, there had to be people out there that were like, geez, look what they're doing. That's an all-female band. Here I am with like 3 other guys. I want to be like them. So when you hear these stories, I'm sure there are people who tell you, that you were an inspiration to them or the Go-Go's. Like, do you almost feel, I'm not going to say a sense of like an achievement, but almost like, well, I'm glad I could do that for you, or I paved the way for acts like yourselves?
yeah. I think I like to just say it's really about visibility, and the shame of it is that Susie Quatro wasn't a big rock star in America, but the people that knew about her that were young girls like me. I mean, Joan Jett became Joan Jett because
Yeah.
of Susie Quatro. And when I went to England in 70, I think 76, with my mom another time, there was tons of girls. Like I had to twist my friend's arms to play an instrument in Austin, but in England there was lots of girls my age playing, and because of Susie. And it's so much about visibility, and I think it's a shame if more females in the 70s and even in the 60s knew that there was other women doing that. It would have inspired them more, because now you have YouTube and you have the internet. I mean, there was women starting big bands in the 40s and stuff, and 50s, and there was, now I know about Sister Rosetta Tharpe and many Memphis Minnie, and I didn't know about Fanny. Fanny had a hit record, and we're touring with people, and Bowie was a fan, and there was all these women doing it, but they weren't visible. We didn't have the internet, and I think how many more girls might have started bands. I was just lucky to see Susie, and it made me want to do it. But that's just a long way of answering your question, which is yes, the Go-Go's were quite visible. We came up when MTV was getting started, so we were on television. We were playing a lot, but not, your young girls aren't going to be at the local
Yeah.
club. The 13-year-old isn't going to go to the nightclub in Atlanta and see the hot new band from LA. And we weren't on the radio at first either, so TV did a lot for us. And yes, I think visibility is key, and I think it's across the board. I think, a young girl who's interested in, maybe isn't interested in a traditional, supposedly female thing, and then she sees a big article on some women in tech, writing software or code and stuff. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I could do that too. So yeah, I think it's just like you're talking about visibility, seeing it, you know, can just open all kinds of possibilities. And I'm proud that the Go-Go's did that for people too.
No, I really love your answer there because it kind of spans off of what I was saying when you were saying like you got, I guess, luck and just seeing your idol kind of over in England. And yeah, like the rest of the world don't know maybe about her, but you get the chance to see this and it kind of changed your whole life. Like I look at it from the standpoint of, what MTV brought in that sense. Like again, it's around the 80s. Now, I wasn't watching a lot of MTV because I'm a 90s child, but we did have
Hmm.
much music up in Canada. And like acts like
Hmm.
the Bare Naked Ladies even said like that kind of got them into music and exposure. So I'm looking at a standpoint of kind of with the punk aspect of we had Avril Lavigne. And, in Canada, she's kind of like an icon, a princess basically. But you could go to other parts of the world and if there was no much music, there was no MTV, they'd be looking at you like, never heard of her. Who you talking about? Now, did you mean this girl? Like we've got one in Germany that's a German Avril Lavigne. And you're like, no, but the exposure to all of it, like when you get older and you do your research, like I remember watching Robin on MTV and I was like, oh geez, like that's a great singer. And then when you find out later that she's not even from North America, she's from over, I think it's like Sweden or somewhere. And you're like, I wouldn't have known, but it didn't make a difference. I was exposed. I'm a fan. So
Yeah.
what you were saying, like MTV bringing in a brand new audience to you, like you're thinking maybe, okay, the US market, even the Canada market, okay, we know you, but you go over maybe Japan or Germany and there's people like, I want to be just like her because I've seen her on TV and she gave me a message that says, I can do this. And I think that's really interesting. Now, I want to get into, of course, some of your inspirations or musical acts that I believe you said that you enjoy or kind of inspired to be. Like you mentioned about Blondie, the Ramones. Tell me what made them stick out to you. Like, was it just a style? Was it kind of like, because you were kind of heavily, as I read, you were a bit of a punk rock person, correct?
I started out just being, a little rock and roller. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
the bands I loved when I was a teenager were David Bowie and Mark Bolan, T-Rex, and the Faces, and the Who, and Zeppelin, and the Stones, and the Beatles, and I liked a lot of really bluesy. I liked Cream. I liked Humble Pie. So I was really from the kind of, but I always loved Motown and R&B and a lot of other things too. But that was my main music was rock and roll. When I started playing guitar, because those were the bands I looked up to, when I decided I wanted to be
Yeah.
in a band, I thought, well, I'm going to have to be as good as Jimmy Page or Eric Clapton. I was playing the guitar, and it didn't occur to me that I could even try to do it until I was really, really good. And I just thought this was going to be a off because I'll start doing bands and everything, but that's a lot of practicing and a lot of work to get to where they are. I was also of an age that when punk rock started becoming visible, and Texas wasn't the first in line to be hip to punk rock. I mean, I was lucky because again, I was in England and I started seeing for myself. I started saying, I'd go out and see punk rockers, and I'm like, hmm. And then I started liking the music. I really thought the Sex Pistols were great, and I liked a lot of those bands. And I decided to come home and start a punk band because I thought I don't have to wait till I can play like Jimmy Page. I can do this now. Johnny Ramone just knows bar chords, and I can do that.
Yeah.
And so besides liking the music, it gave me access to chasing the dream seemed a little closer because these bands were on tour, they were making records, and it was my music. It was my age. That's what was. But I never was like a tried diehard punk rocker. I mean, I had a short haircut at some point, short spiky haircut, but I liked a lot of the fashion, but I would never fully identify. And pretty quickly, the stuff that I liked lent was more in the melodic area, like
Okay.
Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe and Blondie. And, before, like, there was a while where New Wave was all of it. Whether you were Elvis or whether you were the Pistols, it was all New Wave. And then it started dividing more, and New Wave was more of kind of like the more kind of pop end of it. And then there was hardcore punk. I was just really about the songs and the bands and not really identifying with who I was, it didn't affect my image anyway. And when I first moved to LA, the scene was very inclusive. You didn't have to have, safety pins all over your clothes and crazy hair and all ripped. You didn't have to look like a hardcore punk to
Yeah.
go see. You could look like anybody and go like a punk band. If you look at most of the audience shots from back then, it's a real mishmash of people. It's not like everybody's looking hardcore.
Yeah, like the
And the same
scene.
way, yeah, and you could look hardcore and go have fun at a rockabilly show. It was very inclusive. It was just a scene about music and being young and being out there, and just like most organic scenes. I think it's just they just sprout up, and if you're in that age where you're just out every night, in the clubs and checking out the new bands, it's a lot of fun.
You mentioned, of course, going to LA. And I kind of want to bring this up just so people get a little bit more of imagine it a little bit more, get the image in their mind. But like, this is at 19, I read that you go to LA. So at 19, for me, I'm just trying to figure out what I'm doing after high school. Am I going to Memorial University here in Newfoundland? Am I going up away somewhere in Canada? At 19, you're basically saying, I'm out of Austin. I'm out of here. I'm going to LA. Like, let's live the dream. So were you nervous? Was it just something that you're like, I have to do it, otherwise I'm never going to know?
I felt like I needed to take the next step. I had been playing in bands for a few years, and in my mind, that's what you did to succeed. You have to go to New York or Los Angeles to succeed. And sure, and I wasn't nervous at all. It was difficult up there. I was really broke, but I'd been taking care of myself since I was little. It was,
Yeah.
I was not, I was very much about just kind of, I went there and I got a job and I just dived in, and it never occurred to me that I wouldn't be successful. Never occurred to me.
At this time, I know, like, I'm just looking at my notes here, like you co-founded, I think it's like the Textones, and later the GoGos would use the songs that you wrote during this time. Like, to me, everything is a project, or everything kind of comes full circle, whether you want to believe it or not. But it's like, when you're writing these songs at this time for this one project, did you ever think you'd use it for another? And then when you did use it, was it kind of like, oh, cool? Like, was it like a surreal moment for you to be like, oh, geez, these songs that I'm writing, this band that I'm with likes them, we're using them. And when they become on your albums, or you use them for, again, being on the charts, did you kind of look back at it now and go like, wow, that's pretty impressive. Like, I'm glad I did that.
Well, when you're writing a song, I'm not generally thinking about where it'll go. I'm just trying to make the best song, and I've always been like that. But when the Go-Go's, when I was asked to join and be a permanent member, I said to them that it was important to me that I be a contributing writer. Of course, they were really happy to have another writer, and it ended up being something the band really needed. I just knew they were a good song. I mean, a good song is a good song, and the Textones weren't a big band. So for the Go-Go's to do one of my songs, even if the Textones had done it, it was great, because it meant it would, sell a lot and get a lot more people hearing it, and reach more people if the Go-Go's did one of my songs. Plus, the main thing was, I was so happy to contribute, because I loved the band and I wanted the band to stay successful and stay making records and stay touring. And you can't do that just without continuing to create and produce stuff. So I was really happy to contribute and pull my weight and give something back to the band that had, kind of given me a vehicle to achieve my dreams.
No, and I think that's cool, like the aspect that you said, of course, about writing your own songs, and like when they use it and they were like, I enjoy the fact, because it's always like a catch-22 sometimes with bands, where some bands are like, well, we already have writers, you're just here to play, like, like this is our lead writer, like easy there now, like don't get ahead of yourself. But like when you do have bands that are embracing that, I'm like, number one, it makes you feel a little bit valued, because you're like, okay, so they respect my opinion, respect my songwriting process. But at the other point, it does keep a band kind of fresh. You grow together, bouncing ideas off each other. Like that's what I think makes anything really in life successful. Like I know with just say podcasting on the side, like if there's only one person involved, you're only getting one person's opinion, one person's triumphs and fails. But if there's other people, like, why don't you try this differently? Why don't you do this? Like, how come, why don't we get this person on or go down this path? You're like, okay, cool. Like it gives you a little bit of longevity in a sense, because it keeps you grounded in the sense that you got to respect other people's opinions and their process. But at the same time, it's almost like the more the merrier, and the more that you can go around, the more wealth for everybody. I want to talk about that because, of course, going to the GoGos, that was in, I believe, 1980. You joined that band. And the interesting story that I thought that I would never be able to do, and this is like full kudos to you for doing it, but you didn't have much time before you debuted to learn all the songs, all the chords, and, you know, not a lot of rehearsal time. I think you said it was like about, I think it was like 4 hours or 4 days when you learned a song, and it was like 2 practices before you made a debut on New Year's Eve. Like, were you nervous? Were you just like gung-ho, setting your mind to get it done?
Yeah, I wrote the prologue to my book is about that experience because it was so intense, and I really wanted to do a great job. By the time I started learning the songs, I really liked the band, and I hoped that I would not be temporary and that I would get to stay. So I I was nervous about playing because it was sold out show. I had more experience really than the people in that band, but they had more experience being super popular. There was it was 8 shows. Each one is sold out, and I'd never experienced anything like that, where night after night, 2 shows a night sold out. It was incredible, and it was pretty much, it was all I ever wanted up until that moment. And yeah, it was nerve-wracking, but it didn't mean I couldn't. I mean, I wasn't so nervous that I was afraid. I mean, nervous is just, that it's important to you. That's what I look at nervous as. It just means it's important to you.
Yeah, and like again, you had it's albums there, like of course, Can't Stop the World, Vacation, Head Over Heels, and I kind of want to mention this, like not in a rude way or a mean way, but like I heard Head Over Heels, but I grew up on the Disney Channel, so I grew up watching like just say Even Stevens, The Amanda Show, and I think it was like Phil the Future, and I think Allie and AJ did a cover of like Head Over Heels, and Disney would play it. And again, as a kid, if you've never heard the original song, I've actually had people come up to me when I was smaller and be like, "Did you hear Allie and AJ's new song?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it sounds really good." And then you'd hear it, and you're like, wait a minute, that's a cover. They're doing a cover of that song." And to me, it was just kind of interesting because there are people that will even grow up today that you'll listen to someone else's cover, like someone that was famous in the 90s, and they're doing it today. And someone will come up to you and be like, "Do you ever hear or Beat It?" And you'll be like, "Yeah, I did. What are you talking about?" It's like, "Yeah, this guy made it famous." I'm like, "Oh my God, no, that was Michael Jackson. What are you talking about?" So it has to be, I guess, kind of flattering to you when you do see people do covers of your song, because I guess it's kind of touched them in an inspirational way, or something that they said, "I'm going to sit down and learn this masterpiece."
Oh yeah, it's great. I love when anybody does any song that I've written. It's exciting.
During Talk Show, I read there was some difficulties, and then the band broke up, of course, in 1985. Like, what happened there, and how did you guys reconcile, or I guess join up again? I can never say that word, reconcile. Oh, there you go. But because there have been a lot of times where it's like bands break up, reform, break up, and reform. Like, what happened, if you don't mind me asking, here for this to kind of just go west, or I guess go west or go south?
hmm Well, it's fairly well documented part of the Go-Go's story. We broke up. Jane Weedland left the band, and she was a key member, and we tried to go on. I moved to guitar. We hired a new bass player. We played a few giant shows in Brazil at Rock in Rio, but our guitarist Charlotte had a very serious drug problem, and Belinda wasn't real happy anymore, and people were burned out and weren't having fun, and there had been a time where it became evident that the songwriters were making a lot more money than the other people that didn't write songs, and didn't feel fair to some of the band members and made them, not enjoy it as much. So there's a lot of factors, but we were also, once, if everybody's not into it, it's not working anymore. You can't make somebody be into it, you know. You just can't do it. So I thought it was stupid. I wanted to keep going. I wanted to take a break or take a year off or 2 years off, and I didn't see any reason to break up the band, and I was very upset about it. But you're just one person. A band is like what everybody wants. If one person doesn't want to do it anymore, what are you going to do?
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, because it's great when bands get back together, especially when they can make up for lost times or just figure out their differences. And it's something to the mindset of, for someone like myself who grew up with Oasis, like I keep on waiting for Oasis to come back around, but like it's to the point where it's like, geez, you guys are brothers, you're not even getting close to getting along. So it's
Yeah.
nice when band members that maybe aren't even related, it kind of makes me laugh at it, because geez, you guys are family, you're not getting along. Look at these people over here, they're not family, but they can still find a way or a common ground to come back together. And
Right.
I want to give it kind of the utmost compliment in a way, because I do know, and I hope you don't mind me bringing this up either, but like, there was a time that it seemed like it was really rough, because you kind of sued your band members, but in fairness, because you were getting left out of the benefits and the profits. And even to get that reconciled, I mean, it says a lot about the personalities in the band and everyone involved, if you can still
Well,
reconcile.
the bond between us is much stronger than that. And Gina sued Charlotte in 1995, and it was a terrible thing. And Charlotte had to overcome that. Gina sued her. I only sued because they fired me and didn't want to give me my share of what I
Yeah,
had helped
exactly.
build up for 30 years. I didn't want to sue anybody, but I'm not going to just go away without getting my share of what I've built. And yet, I think the bond is much stronger, and what we have, accomplished. And it wasn't, I learned not to take it personally. I understood that there was a lot of dysfunction and toxicity in the band, and I looked at it more as an opportunity to be with my daughter and to maybe find other things in my life that I was interested in. That's when I started writing my book. A lot of good came from that. It was really painful, but it was also good came out of it too. And I ultimately ended up knowing it wasn't me. I was the one that it worked on, but I was not the first one that people had tried to kick out. There was a very dysfunctional, toxic element in that band that, you know, kind of just seemed to always want something bad to do. And so I learned to let that go, and it's just, I happened to be the one it worked on. But yeah, it's all the bond, it's all good now. The documentary really helped us heal a lot, and we we wrote a new song and released it with the documentary, and we're going to tour this summer if the pandemic allows for it. So a lot of we have shared, we've had a lot of ups and downs, and you know, betrayals and people hurting each other, but we've managed to pull it together. And it's not, a cynical person would say, oh, they just do that for money, but it's not really that, because the truth is we could be making way more
Yeah.
money than we actually do. I mean, we hardly ever do anything. So it's not just about money, it's about more having something that has transcended a long time, and something that we're proud of. We have a legacy.
And it's not like, in fairness too, it's not like the way that the kind of media perceives it is always trying to make someone look like the bad person, or like, can you believe these guys are doing this, or these gals are like cutting at each other's throats. But in fairness, as you get older, like I know myself, when you're young and you're watching this on TV, you're like, how dare that person do that? Or geez, can't you all get along? But as you get older, like everything's a little bit about the business side. And, even you could give a top 10 of your favorite bands, and I guarantee you at least five or six of them have either had a falling out, something that happened. Like for myself, full disclosure, like I grew up with the Backstreet Boys and I thought like these guys are inseparable. But when you watch documentaries like the ones that you have or theirs, or even watching like Family Matters or Boy Meets World, like TV shows, once you get to the nitty gritty of seeing behind the scenes, yeah, they have falling outs. Yeah, there's people that are like, I've only worked with this person for season 5 or season 6 because I had to. But once this happened, like we had a falling out, but yes, we reconciled and everything's fine. But you get a lot of respect for people who don't let it linger, I guess, or don't hold it over you. It's not going to stop the world. You know, it's all going to be okay. Just figure it out. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, of course, about hopefully when the pandemic ends, that you guys are going to be touring again. Because that, in a sense, it's not just all talk, it's actions as well. You're basically saying like, yeah, we've figured it out and now we're happy to tour again.
Well, we also played in 2018. We did some shows and we've been doing things. We just don't tour a lot.
You mentioned it earlier, All I Ever Wanted. You kind of put the pun in there in the question. But when you were growing up, did you ever think you were actually going to, number one, write a book and have this much to kind of put in this book? Because I know myself, 29 years old here, I think about writing a book and I'm like, oh, I'm going to call it 3 buses because that's how long it took me to go to a university. And I'm going to make up a story about my disability, like not make up a story, but tell a story about my disability and forming a podcast. But like, at the same time, like who's going to buy a 29 years old's book when like I'm not famous, I'm not well known all over the universe? But did you ever think of that when you were writing your book? Like, oh, people are going to love my stories. I'm going to put some details in here that not a lot of people know. Because I know when you're doing other hits to promote the book, I was actually kind of intrigued when you told the story about the plane ride, how you went on you got offered to go on a plane ride. And the first night you were like, I'm not doing that. There's no way. Things could go wrong. And then the second night you go on it, something does actually go wrong.
Yeah. Well, I felt like I had to be a good writer. Even though I was in a big band, I'm not a really big celebrity. I'm not the most known person in the GoGos. So I knew it had to be written in a way that was compelling and that was, you know, some writers, you just like their book. You don't like their book because they're famous. You know, I've read lots of memoirs from people that weren't famous, but they wrote a great book about something in their life, just like what you're talking about. I mean, Mary Carr, who wrote The Liars Club, huge bestseller. It's just about a girl growing up in Texas with an alcoholic dad. It's a fantastic book. You know, Cheryl Strayed, Wild. She did a big hike and found herself, and it's a fantastic book. You know, none of these. So many memoir writers are not celebrities. I prefer those stories than, you know, a lot of celebrity books. They just seem like they're just kind of telling you, I don't know, just all the things that all the famous people they met or all the things they did. And so I knew that my book had to just be very honest and real and just tell it like it is. And I thought it was a good story, and I did the best I could. And I knew that I had to write really well, because I was looking at it more like these kind of memoirs, not like, oh, I'm a big star and everybody wants to know about me. You know, that wasn't how I approached it at all.
That's going to do it for this episode of Tobin Tonight. Our thanks to Kathy Valentine for coming on to the show. Remember, you can find past, present, and future episodes on TobinTonight.com, Spotify, or iTunes. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and leave a comment or two. For Tobin and myself, this is Jacob saying thank you for listening and good night.